When I was 17, I stopped asking my dad for help. My name's Kevin. I'm 29 now, and if there's one thing life has taught me, it's that people will show you exactly who they are if you're patient enough to watch them long enough. And my dad? He made sure I saw it plain as day before I even hit adulthood. I grew up in a house that looked picture perfect from the outside. White siding, neatly trimmed lawn, my dad's name on the mailbox in big bold letters like he was the king of the cul-de-sac. Inside, though, things were different. My mom passed away when I was 9, and within 2 years, Dad had married Trish, a woman who never quite looked me in the eye unless it was to correct me or complain about something I did wrong. With her came Melissa and Haley, my new stepsisters, who were around my age but treated me like I was the house pet that overstayed its welcome. At first, I tried to fit in. I really did. I was the kid who thought if I just worked hard enough, got good grades, stayed polite, they'd accept me. But slowly, the imbalance started to show. Christmases where Melissa got new iPhones and I got secondhand sweaters. Dinners where Trish would make something I was allergic to and then tell me I was too sensitive when I didn't eat it. Family vacations where I was told there wasn't enough room in the van, so I stayed with my grandma instead. Still, none of it compared to what happened the summer before senior year. College had always been my dream. Not because I was chasing some fantasy, but because I knew it was my only ticket out. I spent hours researching scholarships, studying for the SATs, joining clubs I didn't even care about just to pad my application. I figured even if my dad wasn't the most affectionate guy, he'd at least help cover some of the cost. After all, he owned a local construction company that had 3 trucks with his name on the side and always seemed to be hiring. So when Melissa, who was a year older than me, got accepted into a private university across the country, I didn't think much of it. She wasn't exactly the academic type, but somehow she landed a spot in some communications program that probably cost more than our house's down payment. Dad threw her a party. I remember standing in the backyard, watching as he handed her a check in front of everyone, saying something like, "My little girl's going to conquer the world." I clapped, smiled, even helped clean up afterward. Then came Haley. She was my age, just a few months younger, but somehow everything always seemed easier for her. She picked a state school nearby and got in with average grades. Dad helped her move into the dorms personally, bought her new furniture, even upgraded her laptop because she'd need it for college work. When it was my turn, I sat down with him one night after dinner. It was awkward. He was watching some home improvement show, and I kept glancing at the screen like I was interrupting something sacred. But I cleared my throat and said, "Hey, I've been accepted into 2 schools. One's got a great engineering program. I just wanted to talk about, maybe, what kind of help I could get from you. Even partial, I can cover the rest with loans." And he didn't even mute the TV. He just turned to me, not angry, not annoyed, just flat, like he was reading the weather report. "You're a man now, Kevin. You need to figure it out for yourself." At first, I thought he was joking. I laughed nervously and said, "No, really." But he didn't blink. "Melissa and Haley are girls. They'll get married and settle down. You've got to make your own way. That's how the world works." I stared at him for a solid 10 seconds, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. I remember my heart doing this weird thud in my chest, not from anger, not yet, but from a realization that I'd been living in someone else's house this whole time. Not a home, not a family, just a roof where I paid rent in silence and obedience. I didn't argue. What was the point? That night, I went to my room, closed the door, and didn't sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how 2 girls who weren't even biologically his could be showered with support, while I, his only son, was told to sink or swim. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into finding a way out. I applied for every scholarship, every grant, every side job I could manage. I took a gap year just to save money, worked at a mechanic's garage during the day, stocked shelves at night. No one in the house noticed, or if they did, they didn't care. Trish would still ask me to take the trash out like I was some mooch sleeping on her couch. Melissa came home on breaks and acted like royalty. Haley got a car from Dad the summer after her freshman year, so she wouldn't have to rely on campus shuttles. Me? I was biking to both jobs on a rusted mountain bike I bought off Craigslist. And yet, even then, I didn't hate them. Not yet. I just accepted it. Thought maybe this was just how things were. Maybe this was just life giving me a rough hand, and I had to play it smart. But that changed one afternoon. 2 years later, when I came home early from work and overheard a conversation in the kitchen. Dad was talking to Trish. I stayed in the hallway, out of view, just about to walk in when I heard my name. He's stubborn, that's for sure, Dad was saying. But I think it's good for him. Builds character. Trish snorted. You really think he'll make something of himself? And my dad, the man who helped two girls not related to him chase their dreams without hesitation, chuckled and said, Nah, he'll be back here in a few years, begging for a job. You'll see. I froze. Right there, 5 feet away, hearing my own father bet on my failure like it was inevitable. Like I was some long-shot horse in a race no one even wanted to watch. I don't remember walking to my room. I don't remember what I did that night. But something shifted in me. Something cold, quiet, and sharp. I stopped trying to be seen. Stopped hoping for validation. From that moment on, everything I did was for me. I enrolled in community college the next semester. Took classes while still working both jobs. Transferred to a university with a full-ride scholarship 2 years later. Studied business with a minor in mechanical engineering. Started freelancing. Built a small app that helped local shops manage inventory. It took off more than I expected. Got investors. Turned it into a real company. Grew it. Sold it. Started another. By the time I was 28, I wasn't rich, but I was stable. Comfortable. I owned my own house, my own car, my own future. I had an office downtown with a view of the skyline, and 10 employees whose lives I was proud to support. I even got featured in a local business magazine. That's how he found me. 12 years after that night in the kitchen, I heard a knock on my office door. My assistant popped in and said, Hey, there's someone here asking to speak with you. Says he's your father. And just like that, I looked up, and there he was. Worn suit. Nervous smile. A man who used to speak with authority, now clutching a worn-out cap in his hands like he was the one asking for permission. Hey, Kev, he said. Mind if I come in? I need a favor. And that is where things got interesting. I didn't say anything at first. I just stared at him, my father, standing in the doorway of my office like a stranger who took a wrong turn. His eyes scanned the room like he didn't expect this. Like he thought I'd be in some shared workspace or rundown garage office with a flickering light bulb and a rusty coffee pot in the corner. But no. Behind me was a glass wall with a skyline view, the windows reflecting the amber tones of a late afternoon. On the walls were framed patents and press features. I'd even gotten a plaque recently, some local entrepreneur award that meant nothing to me, but clearly meant something to the investors and clients who came through here. And now he was here, standing right next to a water cooler with sparkling and still options, acting like we'd just bumped into each other at the grocery store. Kevin, he repeated, this time softer, like maybe I hadn't heard him. I was hoping we could talk. I looked over at my assistant, Lila, who was lingering in the hallway, unsure if she should intervene. I gave her the smallest nod. Yeah, it's fine, and she reluctantly returned to her desk. Dad stepped inside like he wasn't sure if his feet would be welcomed by the floor. He kept glancing around, half smiling like he was proud, like he wanted to say you've done well, but knew better than to speak first. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. He sat. For a long time, I just let the silence hang. I wanted him to feel it. The weight of every year he wasn't there. Every birthday he forgot. Every Christmas card that said, Happy Holidays, with no personal note. Every time I sat alone watching Haley unwrap a new iPad while I quietly pocketed a $25 gas card. He shifted in his seat. You've got quite the place here, he offered. I finally spoke. You didn't come here for a tour. He cleared his throat and nodded, rubbing the back of his neck like he always did when he was about to ask for something. Yeah. No, you're right. I need a favor. Of course he did. You remember my company? The construction one, he asked, already knowing I did. Things haven't been great. Had to let a bunch of guys go last year. Economy hit us hard. Materials went up, clients backed out, insurance got messy. We're in a tough spot. I didn't say anything. He pushed forward. We're not asking for a handout. Just a bridge loan. Something to keep the doors open until we stabilize. You know the business. We've still got good bones. We just need a little boost. I should have said no right then. But I didn't. Not because I felt guilty. Not because I cared. But because something in me wanted to hear more. Wanted to see how far he'd go. I leaned back in my chair and asked, how much? His eyes lit up like he thought that meant he had a chance. 50, maybe 60,000. I almost laughed. Not because the number was ridiculous, I could have written a check that afternoon, but because the audacity was, "You're asking me for $60,000, I said slowly, "when you wouldn't even co-sign a $5,000 student loan 12 years ago." His smile faltered. "That was different. You needed to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I was trying to raise a man. Were you?" He hesitated, visibly shaken. "I didn't mean it like that. Look, maybe I wasn't perfect, but—" "No, you were clear," I said, my voice sharper now. "You told me I had to figure it out myself because I was a man. And I did. I figured out every scholarship, every job, every night class, every couch I slept on when I couldn't afford rent. I built everything you see here without a single cent from you." He looked down. "I know. No, I don't think you do," I snapped. "Because while I was working triple shifts and studying on my breaks, Melissa was partying on your dime and failing her classes. Haley got a second car while I was patching a bike tire with duct tape." His jaw tightened. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked. Because to me, it sounds exactly like what happened. He didn't have a response. And that should have been the end of it. That should have been the final nail. But the truth is, the worst part, the real betrayal, that didn't happen until years earlier. And maybe I should have seen it coming. But back then, I was too tired, too numb, too busy surviving to understand how deep the favoritism really went. It started with something small. About 6 months after I started community college, I stopped by the house to grab a few boxes I'd left in the garage. I hadn't been around much, and that was by design. But Trish wasn't home that day, and Melissa was back at school, so I figured I could slip in and out unnoticed. While I was digging through the boxes, I found a manila folder stuffed between an old toolbox and a broken fan. Curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. Inside were copies of tuition invoices. Not mine, obviously. Melissa's. Haley's. But what caught my eye was the breakdown. Room and board, textbook fees, meal plans. And on the bottom, in messy handwriting, were notes. Paid 6/5, paid in full, Dad covered. Melissa needs extra for summer session. And then, a receipt. A single sheet from a bank I didn't recognize, with my dad's name and Trish's listed jointly. A wire transfer, $35,000. I stared at that number for a long time. I didn't even realize my hands were shaking until I dropped the folder and half the papers scattered across the floor. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about tough love. This wasn't about raising me to be strong. This was about choosing. He didn't forget me. He didn't push me to be independent. He just picked them over me. Every single time. The bitterness settled in my stomach like a stone, but I said nothing. I took my boxes and left. Fast forward to a year later. Melissa drops out of school. No big announcement. Just a quiet return home. A few vague excuses about changing majors and mental burnout. Dad spins it into some story about her being brave enough to try something new. Meanwhile, I'm at university now, living in a crummy off-campus apartment with a mold problem and no heating in the winter. I've got 3 roommates, 2 jobs, and 6 classes. And still, I get texts from Trish. "Can you come by this weekend? Melissa needs help setting up her Etsy shop. We're having a family dinner. Don't be rude and skip it." The worst was the Christmas right before my senior year. I didn't want to go home. Everything about that house felt off. But I hadn't seen my grandma in months, and she was the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered. So I went. Dinner was awkward. Melissa had dyed her hair neon pink and was ranting about toxic corporate systems, while Haley live-tweeted the meal. Dad was quiet most of the night, sipping from his beer, pretending like we were all one big happy family. Then, after dessert, he cleared his throat and tapped his glass. "I've got a little announcement," he said. "Nothing huge, just a little early gift." He reached under the table and pulled out 2 small boxes, wrapped in silver paper with neat little bows. Haley squealed. Melissa clapped like a seal. They opened them in sync. Inside, keys to brand new cars. I remember sitting there, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten slice of pumpkin pie, thinking this was some kind of joke. "They're used," Dad said quickly, like that would make it better. "But good condition. Safe. Reliable." Everyone cheered. Except me. I stood up, left my plate on the table, and walked out without a word. No one followed me. No one called. A week later, I got an email from Haley, forwarded by accident, I think. It was a thread between her and Dad, discussing the specs of her new car and how Kevin was probably just jealous because he never learned to save properly. That was the breaking point. That's when something in me snapped. When the final thread of hope I'd been clinging to, the idea that maybe, one day, he'd realize what he'd done, finally dissolved. I deleted their numbers. Blocked Trish on Facebook. Stopped replying to group invites, birthday messages, fake attempts at connection. I shut the door and locked it behind me. Until now. Until this very moment, 12 years later, with my dad sitting across from me, suddenly humble, suddenly quiet, asking me for help. "Please, Kevin," he said, voice low. "I wouldn't be here if I had another choice." I looked at him for a long time. And just when he thought I might say yes, there was a knock on my door. "Hey, Kev." Lila peeked in, hesitating. "There's someone else here to see you. Says her name is Haley." I froze. And then, I smiled. Because I knew exactly what this was about. I hadn't seen Haley in nearly 7 years. Not since that Christmas with the car keys and the awkward silence I left in my place at the table. Not since I deleted their numbers and erased that part of my life like a corrupted file on an old hard drive. So when Lila said her name, something in me went cold. My father stiffened in the chair across from me. "She's here?" he asked, confused, and then quickly masked it with a nervous chuckle. Probably just wanted to come along, show support. Support. Right. I stood and walked to the door without saying a word. When I opened it, there she was, same carefully curated face, same posture, like the world owed her a little more room than it gave everyone else. But there were new lines under her eyes now, slight bags that no concealer could fully hide. She wore a beige coat draped over one arm and clutched her phone like it was a shield. "Kevin," she said, almost like she was surprised to see me, as if she hadn't just walked into my office. "Haley," I replied, stepping aside. She entered slowly, scanning the room like she was trying to gauge how much success I'd gathered and whether it could be measured in square footage or decor. Her gaze flicked from the plaque on the wall to the designer chair by the window. She gave a short nod, then sat beside Dad without waiting for an invitation. "Long time," she said, folding one leg over the other. I didn't respond. She glanced at Dad. "He told you, right? About the business?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that why you're here? To pitch me too?" "No," she said, but her voice wavered. "Well, kind of, but not just for that. Look, we know things between us haven't been smooth." I leaned against the edge of my desk, arms crossed. "Smooth?" Dad opened his mouth like he was about to jump in, but Haley shot him a look and he backed down. I watched it all with a strange sort of detachment, like I was watching a play I'd already seen the ending to. "We just thought," she started again, "maybe it's time to put the past behind us. Life's too short, right?" It was such a Hallmark line. Scripted, practiced, but not sincere. "What do you want?" I asked. She hesitated, then finally laid it out. The construction company was deeper in the red than Dad had admitted. Turns out, a few bad contracts, some tax issues, and poor planning had left them on the brink. They'd mortgaged their house, liquidated savings, even took out loans in Trish's name. And now creditors were circling. "We could lose everything," she said, voice trembling now. "Dad could lose his house. Melissa's still living there with her kids. Mom's freaking out. It's bad, Kevin." I stared at her for a moment, and then at my father. He couldn't even meet my eyes. "She's living there?" I asked. "Melissa? With her kids?" Dad nodded, barely. "She's going through a tough time. So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "The daughter who dropped out, never held a steady job, and had her tuition gift-wrapped for her. She's still in the house you mortgaged, while you're sitting here asking me for money to bail you out." "Kevin, don't do this," Haley snapped, the calm mask cracking for a moment. "This isn't about who got what years ago. This is about family. And right now, our family's drowning." "Our," I repeated. "Is it though?" Silence. That was the moment I realized. They hadn't come here for reconciliation. They'd come because the well had dried up everywhere else. And now I was the last faucet with a steady flow. And yet, despite everything, despite the years of bitterness I'd buried, I still remembered what it felt like to hit rock bottom. Because I had hit it once. It was after my second year at university. I'd overestimated my summer income, underestimated tuition hikes, and the scholarship I was promised got reduced due to budget constraints. I appealed, begged, filled out 100 more forms, but the answer was the same. I was $4,800 short. I didn't have it. My 2 part-time jobs barely covered rent and food. My roommate was moving out, and I couldn't afford the place alone. I couldn't get a cosigner. Couldn't qualify for a loan. I was a week away from being dropped from classes. I remember sitting in a dingy diner, staring at my cold coffee, just lost. I didn't cry. I didn't even frown. I just sat there thinking, so this is it, huh? I made it this far just to lose it now? I had no family to call. No backup plan. No safety net. That night, I slept in the back of my car. It was June. Hot. Mosquitoes buzzing through a cracked window. The seatbelt digging into my side. I used my backpack as a pillow and my hoodie as a blanket. And I remember thinking, I'll never forget this. No matter what happens later, no matter how far I climb, I will never forget this night. It was the turning point. The next morning, I dragged myself to the student union and offered to tutor calculus, physics, econ, anything I could. I talked to the department head, pitched a work-study program, offered to sweep floors if that's what it took. I started freelancing online, making logos and basic websites for anyone willing to pay $25. For months, I lived off canned soup and tap water. I learned how to stretch $1 so far it snapped. But I stayed in school. I finished that semester. And the next. And the next. Eventually, one of my freelance projects, a basic inventory tracker for a student-run coffee kiosk, got picked up by a local chain. They offered me a contract to build a more advanced version. That contract led to others. I learned to code properly, took night classes, grew my portfolio. By the time I graduated, I had enough clients to go full-time. I rented a tiny office above a dry cleaner and hired my first intern. That was the rise. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't fast. But it was mine. Every inch of it earned. Every win paid for in sleepless nights and quiet resilience. So now, sitting in my sleek office, watching the two people who once watched me drown without lifting a hand, now they were gasping for air. And they wanted me to be the life raft. Why now? I asked Haley finally. Why come here? After all this time? She hesitated, then said something so audacious it almost made me laugh. Because you owe us. I blinked. What? You're successful because of us, she said, voice rising. You wouldn't have pushed yourself so hard if things hadn't been the way they were. That pressure made you. Dad was tough. Yeah, but it turned you into this. She gestured around the office like it was part of her argument. My father nodded, slowly. She's right. I may not have done things perfectly, but I gave you the push you needed. You're strong because of it. That's got to mean something. I stared at them in disbelief. And then, slowly, I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because I'd finally seen the full picture. They weren't just entitled. They were delusional. They truly believed that abandoning me had been a gift, that letting me suffer was some twisted version of love, that they had a claim to my success, like it was equity in a stock they'd invested in. I stood. This meeting is over. Haley's face dropped. Kevin, don't. Dad stood too. Just think about it. Please. I opened the door. Neither moved at first, but then Haley grabbed her coat and stormed past me without another word. My father lingered for a moment. I know I made mistakes, he said quietly, but I'm still your father. I looked him dead in the eye. No, you're not. And I closed the door behind them. I sat in my office for a long time afterward. Lights off. City glowing in the distance. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was clear, crystal clear, and I knew exactly what I was going to do next. But not for them. Not this time. I didn't tell anyone what happened that day. Not my assistant, not my COO, not even Leo, my closest friend and unofficial business partner since college. But I thought about it constantly. It wasn't just the nerve they had, walking into my office like I was still some confused teenager asking for scraps. It was the entitlement, the gall to suggest they made me, as if neglect and favoritism were the ingredients to my success, as if watching me drown had been part of the plan all along. And yet, I couldn't stop replaying Haley's face, the crack in her voice, the desperation she tried so hard to mask with forced grace. She had always been good at that, putting on the polished, well-adjusted image while things fell apart behind the curtain. But the curtain had finally dropped. They were losing everything. The house, the business, whatever illusion of control they'd built was crumbling, and I had a front-row seat to the collapse. I'll admit it, I liked the view. But revenge, I've learned, isn't about lashing out. Not for people like me. Not when you've spent your whole life being told to figure it out on your own. No, revenge is a long game. A slow, deliberate strategy. Like chess. You don't flip the board when you're angry. You study the position. You tighten the noose one square at a time. And I had just spotted my opening. 2 days later, I scheduled a meeting with Leo. He met me at our usual cafe, this quiet spot tucked between two office buildings with the best courte-à-deux in the city and a staff who didn't blink if you stayed for 3 hours on a single espresso. Leo was early, laptop open, already nursing his drink. He was tall, sharp-jawed, always wearing something halfway between streetwear and startup chic. One of those rare people who could be both brutally honest and completely loyal at the same time. "What's up?" he asked as I sat down. "You've had that calculating vengeance look all week." I gave a dry laugh. "Do I have a look for that?" "You do," he said. "And you've been quiet. Which means either someone's about to regret everything or you've finally lost interest in your inbox." I took a sip of my coffee. Then I told him everything. About the visit, the ask, the smug entitlement, Haley's line about me owing them for pushing me, Dad's desperate pitch about the company. Leo didn't interrupt. Just listened, brow furrowed slightly, nodding every few minutes. When I finished, he leaned back, whistling under his breath. "Man," he said, "that's rich. Do they even know what we're sitting on?" "No," I replied, "and I don't plan on telling them. Not yet. Because here's the thing. We just closed our Series B round. $15 million. Our startup, now a fast-growing logistics optimization company, wasn't just surviving anymore. We were scaling. Fast. Contracts with retail giants. A proprietary AI system that could reduce supply chain waste by 30%. Industry awards. We were on track for a massive acquisition within 18 months. And I'd made sure none of it led back to my legal name in public-facing press. Every article used Leo as the face. I was the architect behind the curtain. Deliberate. Strategic. Because I didn't want my family crawling out of the woodwork with crocodile tears and sob stories. But now they'd found me anyway. And they were drowning. So I made a decision. "I want to buy them out," I told Leo. He raised an eyebrow. "Buy them out of what?" "The construction company." He blinked. "You want to buy your dad's failing business?" "Exactly." He leaned forward. "Okay, I'm listening. But I need to hear where this is going." I opened my laptop and pulled up the public business registry. I'd already done the research. The company was bleeding, 6 months behind on taxes, massive debt owed to a materials supplier, pending lawsuits over unpaid wages. The building they own had been used as collateral for multiple loans. Trish's name was co-signed on at least 2 of them. "They don't know I know all this," I said. "And that's the point." Leo's eyes gleamed. "You're going to make them an offer." "Exactly. But not as Kevin. Not as their son. I'm going to approach them through a holding company. A shell, essentially. Clean name. No personal connection. Just a local investor with an interest in flipping undervalued family businesses." "And what's the end game?" he asked, though I could already see the grin forming at the corners of his mouth. "I take control of everything. The company, the property, their assets. I become the owner of the very thing my father clung to like a crown. And then," I paused, "and then I show him what a real man does with power." Leo let out a low whistle. "That's cold, Kev. But I like it." We spent the next 2 hours mapping out the plan. First, we registered a new LLC under Leo's name, Redbridge Holdings. Completely legitimate, with its own business email domain, voicemail inbox, and a polished website designed to look like a boutique equity firm that specialized in distressed family businesses. Then we drafted a letter of interest, casually inquiring about buying out the construction company. No hard pitch. Just a "we noticed you may be in need of assistance" approach. We made it sound like a lifeline, not a buyout. A fresh start. We mailed it. 2 weeks later, we got a response. They wanted to meet. I arranged for the meeting to be held at a neutral downtown co-working space, one of those glass and steel buildings with Scandinavian furniture and kombucha on tap. I didn't attend. Leo handled it, dressed in his best investor casual, black button-down, slim-fit slacks, Rolex just peeking from under the cuff. He said they looked uncomfortable. Trish was there too. First time she'd shown her face since my high school graduation. According to Leo, she spent most of the meeting cutting him off, trying to seem smarter than she was. My father, meanwhile, was quiet. Nervous. Probably sensing they were in deeper than he'd admitted. They said they'd think about it. 3 days later, they called back. They were interested in selling 51% to retain family control. We countered with 70%. They argued. We stood firm. Eventually, they caved. The documents were signed 2 weeks later. I owned the majority stake in the company that once shut its doors on me. And they still had no idea. The first thing I did was audit the books. It was worse than expected. They'd taken personal loans through the business, used the company credit card for vacations, paid Melissa under the table for consulting. Haley's name was on the payroll despite not having worked there in years. We fired the accountant, installed our own. I replaced the old foreman with a competent project manager I'd worked with during a previous logistics project. He knew construction inside and out, cleaned house, streamlined operations, cut the dead weight. Melissa stopped showing up entirely when we removed her access to the gas card. Haley called Leo directly, furious, demanding answers. He told her, politely, that the new owners were restructuring. That's when she threatened legal action, claiming emotional damages. It was laughable, but the real surprise came a few weeks later. A letter from the county. Trish had put the house up as collateral not once, but twice. One of the liens had defaulted, and now, unless someone cleared the debt, foreclosure proceedings would begin within 60 days. And the funniest part? One of the liens was technically under the business's name, which meant I now had legal leverage over their house. Poetic. I kept quiet for a while. Let it simmer. Let the panic start to rise. Let the silence from Redbridge Holdings unnerve them. And then, one rainy Thursday morning, I scheduled a meeting. This time, it would be in my office. Same chairs, same skyline, same manila folders with financial documents spread across the desk. But this time, I wouldn't be alone. Leo would be there. Our legal counsel, too. Everything documented. Everything by the book. And for the first time in over a decade, I'd be sitting across from my father and his wife not as their struggling, neglected son, but as the man who owned their future. And this time, they'd be the ones with their backs against the wall. And I hadn't even played my final card yet. I sent the meeting invites out on a Tuesday morning. One to my father, one to Trish, one to Haley. The subject line was simple: Redbridge Holdings, ownership discussion. I didn't use my name. There was no need. They had no idea I was behind the curtain, and I wasn't ready to step into the spotlight, not until the final act. The meeting was scheduled for Friday at 4 p.m., the perfect hour. Late enough to ruin their weekend. Early enough to leave them stewing in the fallout for days. When they arrived, I was in the conference room, waiting. Leo sat at the head of the table, dressed in his signature charcoal jacket and white tee combo, fingers laced, calm, and unreadable. Beside him was our legal counsel, Ava, sharp, composed, and already flipping through the folder in front of her like she was reading the final chapter of a thriller she'd already guessed the ending to. They walked in like they owned the place. Haley in a beige pantsuit, clutching a leather binder, trying to look important. Trish in oversized sunglasses and a scarf, even though we were indoors. And my father, worn but trying to stand tall, still wearing that old leather jacket he thought made him look dignified. I recognized every twitch in his face, every mask he wore. They didn't notice me at first. I was at the far end of the table, behind my laptop. I'd intentionally kept my chair turned slightly, facing the skyline through the glass wall. To them, I was probably just another assistant or junior analyst sitting in. Until I turned. The moment my face came into view, Trish froze mid-sentence. Haley blinked 3 times, jaw tight. My father, he went pale, like he'd just seen a ghost. Kevin, he said. I didn't answer. Not right away. I wanted them to feel it. The dissonance. The walls closing in. Thank you for coming, Leo said coolly. Let's get started. The next 30 minutes were business. Leo walked them through the restructuring plan. Ava presented the compliance documents. They nodded, squirmed, feigned understanding. But I could see it. All of them trying to figure out what I was doing there. Why I was at the table. Why the air had changed. When Leo finished outlining the liquidation timeline for non-essential assets, my father finally snapped. Wait, hold on. You're saying we're selling the building? Ava nodded. Correct. As part of the debt recovery strategy. It's the only viable way to satisfy the lien on the property, which you used as collateral. You can't do that, Trish snapped. That house has been in our family. It hasn't, I said, finally speaking. It was bought 21 years ago, in your name, and then mortgaged 3 times. Twice to cover Melissa's credit card debt. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. How do you know that? I smiled. Because I own it now. Silence. What? Haley whispered. Leo slid a document across the table. As of 2 weeks ago, Mr. Kevin Miller, acting through Redbridge Holdings, acquired a controlling interest in the business, its subsidiaries, and associated assets, including the deed on the office lot and the mortgage lien on the house located at 147 Creekside Drive. My father looked like he'd been punched. He stammered. I don't understand. You don't have to, I said. Just know this. You're sitting in my building, begging for air in my conference room, and the floor beneath your feet is already slipping. Haley stood. You're doing this to punish us. I stood too. Calm. Composed. I'm doing this, I said, because you taught me to be a man who stands on his own. Remember? My father blinked. You said it like it was wisdom, I continued. That men figure it out for themselves. That support is for girls. That I had to earn my worth. I leaned across the table. Well, I did. And now I've earned the right to take everything you thought was untouchable. Trish muttered something under her breath. Probably a curse, but I ignored her. We're offering you a graceful exit, Leo said. You can sign over your remaining shares and walk away debt-free. Or we can pursue liquidation and foreclosure. Your choice. You're bluffing, Haley hissed. Ava slid another document across the table, this one stamped by the county. Notice of intent to foreclose. My father reached for it with shaking hands. You'd do this to your own family? He said hoarsely. I tilted my head. You mean like when you let me sleep in my car? When you gave them everything and told me to figure it out? He didn't answer. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You'll sign the paperwork. You'll leave. You'll lose the house. You'll lose the company. But you'll get to keep your dignity, what little you have left. Because I'm not doing this out of spite. I paused. I'm doing it because I've finally accepted that I don't owe you anything. Not love. Not loyalty. Not mercy. Trish tried to argue. Haley slammed her binder shut. My father just sat there, eyes hollow. They signed. When they left, I didn't follow them out. I stayed behind and watched from the window as they walked to the elevator, slower now. Smaller. It was done. In the months that followed, everything changed. We sold the house. The buyer flipped it within weeks for a profit. I never stepped foot inside, not once. I didn't need to. The company was rebranded, modernized, and merged with a logistics subcontractor. The staff got better benefits. The books were clean. Melissa tried to call once, but I blocked the number. Trish emailed Leo some legal threat. It went nowhere. Haley, she disappeared off social media. I heard she moved to another state. Someone told me she was working at a mid-tier PR agency, back to square one. As for my father? I don't know. I don't ask. And I don't care. Because this story wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about building something they couldn't touch. About choosing myself every single time they didn't. About rising quietly, patiently, until I stood tall enough to look them in the eye and say, we're not the same anymore. And the last thing I ever said to my father was this. You tried to bury me. But you forgot. I was a seed.